Okay, every time we make a video about emo and it gets a little traction, we got somebody like this who wants to come in and talk about like The Cure very specifically. And I gotta tell you, I love The Cure, so it's hard for me to talk about this. But I think what people don't realize is that there really are ways that you can watch the evolution of a genre. And emo, because emo kicked off in the 80s, like we can see the timeline. It's from the 80s. So when we talk about The Cure very specifically, let me just lay this out there. The thing that emo and The Cure have in common is they're both from post-punk. They both are reactions to punk. What The Cure did and what emo became were reactions to punk. But The Cure went more new wavy, okay? And industrial by the end. If you want to give The Cure credit for somebody, and The Cure deserves a ton of credit, highly influential band, and before I even continue, certainly bands of the 2000s emo scene were influenced by The Cure, especially in terms of like aesthetic and vibes. Like, I get that 100%. Robert Smith in Eyeliner totally makes sense. But if you want to talk about the music, The Cure, if I'm going to give them credit for anything, The Cure opened the door for what became industrial in the early 90s. Sometimes we call it goth, industrial. It was sort of new wave in the 80s and what that became. Go back and listen, well, certainly listen to like the 80s catalog from The Cure, which is awesome. But listen to The Cure's Disintegration, which is, in my opinion, their masterwork. I love that album. And listen to Pretty Hate Machine by Nine Inch Nails. Came out the same year. They're the same vibe. The Cure opened the door for someone like Nine Inch Nails. And then think about how Nine Inch Nails evolved into the 90s and what that meant to sort of a goth industrial rebirth and renaissance that took place in the 90s. So if I'm going to give The Cure credit for anything, that's the culture I'm going to give The Cure a lot of credit for in terms of both style and music. And Bauhaus we could put in that sort of same category as well. Emo very specifically came out of DC hardcore. The first time emo was ever used, I got the receipts. It was January 1986, Thrasher magazine to describe Rites of Spring and Embrace. This is the music that was called emo. Emotional hardcore, emo core is where it started. And yes, like every genre, it developed. So you had bands like Embrace and Rites of Spring, and they were making one kind of music. In the 90s, people took that sort of structure, slowed it down, made it very like shoegazy, and that's where you get like your Sunny Day Real Estate, where the structure is very similar, but it's slowed down, it's not fast, it's aggressive anymore. And when you get to a band like Thursday, who does get left out of the conversation a lot, did not reach the levels of fame as other bands in the emo scene, but highly influential band. Thursday is doing like a cleaned up, better produced version of Rites of Spring, and Thursday ends up influencing that New Jersey post-hardcore sound that becomes just a staple of emo. So you can trace the lineage. Now, granted, there is a pop-punk divergence, because once again, these things all share punk and hardcore in common. There is a pop-punk divergence. Pop-punk has a big influence on 2000s emo as well, but that's sort of a different timeline. You go around a different way, and The Cure, I don't think, is a part of that timeline. Once again, vibes, culture, The Cure is totally influential. The Smiths, I'll throw them in there as well. Ton of these emo bands are listening to The Cure and The Smiths, and I'm sure they're pulling from that. But if you want to talk about like the parentage of a genre, I don't think The Cure fits into the emo timeline. Influential, yes, but that's, you could say the same thing about the Beatles, because just influential bands are influential. So no, emo is emo is emo is emo. DC hardcore, emo core, emotional hardcore. That's how we got to where we are today.